I'd like to welcome Mr. React Select, Mr. Class Names, very big deal, not a boomer, Jed Watson to the stage.
Thank you. Wow, that was a lot. I mean, yeah, I think that's actually, I'm so glad to see you all. This is incredible. This was a very scary thing before we did it, and the entire experience has just been amazing. I think the right way to put this is I had a little help from my friends. This was not really all me at all, but it's been an incredible 2 days, and watching all the talks, listening to the ideas, having the hallway track conversations, meeting people, it's been phenomenal. And a few of the things, like there are some themes that always come out. So it's really nice to get the chance to close the conference and to kind of reflect on what we've all looked at. And I think one of the really big themes that's been throughout the last 2 days has been innovation. And this open source kind of mentality, like the spirit of sharing that we've got is a really unique and precious, special thing in our community. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today, the value of open source. Which is, if you listen to anything that Jess and I just said, it's everything. It's also nothing. And this is like a weird conundrum that we have to deal with. So this is kind of what I want to talk about. But hi, I'm Jed. I've done a fair bit of stuff in the last few years, but one of the really consistent things is I've done a lot of open source. So one of the things I did was actually maintain a streak on GitHub for over 1,000 days. Crazy. Don't try this at home. I wouldn't recommend it. But I learned a lot of stuff along the way, and some of that has been published on the internet. Some of it is things that I'm going to talk to you about today. And these ideas kind of come from this experience and then where it's gotten to. So throughout the course of the streak, this was not, it didn't define me by any means. I sort of did a lot of other things at the same time, including starting a company. I traveled the world. I launched some different projects, products. We made stickers. That was cool. I went on holidays with my family. And also, my first daughter was born during the streak. And she's actually just there in the third row. So she's nearly 4 now. And that's Grace. I couldn't resist. So this is kind of to give you the perspective that I'm talking to you as a founder, like a CEO, I guess, effectively co-CEO. Bryce and I run things sometimes. But I'm also a maintainer. I spend a lot of time doing that. And I'm also a parent. And this is kind of like, this is all of me. I'm bringing this to this talk. So reflecting on what I got out of this experience has been kind of an interesting thing that I've done at various times. And I got projects with something north of 50,000 internet points. Code I've written is getting downloaded by people over 7.5 million times a week, which is kind of insane. That blows my mind. Interestingly, despite those big stats, none of that has directly led to any dollars. That's okay. I've made some really good friends. There's a lot of satisfaction involved sometimes in open source. I saw React Select pop up yesterday in Reactronica. And I was like, it's just so exciting. Like, I helped. I was that's amazing. Unfortunately, there are also some jerks on the internet. That's the other side of open source. That's the thing. But there's a lot of appreciation as well. And that, in my experience at least, I've been lucky enough to have that kind of be the overwhelming experience. Probably most importantly, though, I've learned a lot. It's been great. I've absolutely learned things that I cannot imagine how I would have learned if I hadn't kind of thrown myself into this open source journey. So all of that is to say that open source has a lot of value. It's got all these different kinds of value. And all the things I just mentioned are kind of the value to me as an individual that I saw come out of it. But I think in the last 2 days, looking at all of the innovation, like going back to Max's talk when he opened the conference with the history of CSS and JS, I love that timeline. That idea that all these different people around the world are bouncing off each other every couple of weeks. It feels like someone's invented something new and solved the next part of this problem. It has a lot of value to us as a collective. In fact, if you were trying to do your work today, I think you'd find that most of the things you're using in the process are actually open source. From our operating system to our code editor to our browser to our package manager, build toolchain, linter, test runner, backend runtime framework, router, CSS framework, state management, form library, and UI components. Most of it is open source, which is great. What this does for us as developers is it improves our quality of life. Every time I use a tool like Prettier in a project, it's got a tangible net benefit to my quality of life. Open source improves my productivity, even like, the big obvious things like React. Why are we here? It makes us more productive. And ultimately, that also has an impact on the quality of product that we can build, which is really cool. And again, this word is going to keep coming back in this talk, innovation. Open source really powers so much innovation because we build on great abstractions. We're not starting from zero. We're not worrying about the low-level stuff anymore. We have all these really cool building blocks that we now sit on top of. And as developers, we love abstractions. We spend a lot of our time thinking about how to create good abstractions. But do we think enough about the abstractions? Because I think there are more than we're really aware of. Here's an abstraction that was this perspective was given to me by Henry Zhu, who is the lead maintainer of Babel. When we use our CLI, if I start a new React project, that is actually an abstraction. And the package JSON is an abstraction over all of the people behind that project and the work that they put into it and the work they continue to put into it to maintain it. Because our interface to open source is kind of through our text editors and our command lines, what's on the other side of that is people. Now, that's a lot of people, which is unsurprising, right? We're all here for the same reason. Open source is really strong, and I don't want you to hear anything else in this talk. It's amazing. But it does have a weakness, and that's kind of what I want to drill into. I think clearly there is a lot of value in it. At the same time, it has no value because it's open. We have a catch-22. We start out, all the open source projects start out as things that people are passionate about and enthusiastic, or they've got an idea, or they're scratching an itch, or they build something at work and they want to share it with someone else. And so to do that, we open it. We give it away. And that's the right thing to do. It creates engagement. It shares ideas. It's very much the spirit that Jess described, which is the start of, this is one of the foundations of our community. And then, if we're lucky, if we did something good, maybe, sometimes even if we did things that weren't that good, they grow. And this is also amazing. Just the sheer fact that this can happen in our industry is amazing. But then we get to maintenance because we are kind of victims of our own success. Like Tay just mentioned. Once you get something out there, you kind of go from being excited about expressing an idea to now maintaining an idea. And there's value in that as well, but it doesn't start again. This is kind of like a linear progression for open source, which is to say that success is not actually success. And I'll show you a very personal example of this. This issue was opened a month ago. I'm not calling it out in a bad way. It's a very constructive issue, but this question of, is React Select still maintained? Narrator, it is, but I'm at a conference. But this is the sustenance of these projects become really heavy and hard and bigger than kind of an individual. Now, I've got only good things to say about my experience building React Select, and I want to give a particular shout out to two companies, Atlassian and ThinkMill, who have both invested quite heavily in React Select at various times. In a very direct way, we've been able to align that project sometimes to things that we needed to build and work that was going to get done anyway, and it's been done better because we aligned it with the open source. So that's a really cool story. I actually gave a talk about that at ReactConf last year. That's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is that investment, while it's fantastic and this alignment is very lucky and fortuitous, it does not equal sustainability. We actually need sustained investment in open source. So very quickly, added a slide in response to something that Tej just said, and this project became so overwhelming, I stopped maintaining it. And I was having a chat with Brent Jackson on Wednesday and about this very topic, and he said, I'm of the opinion that we need to start charging money for software. Sounds obvious? But we didn't go down that path. I don't think that's the answer. Like, we are very good at paying for things. That's not actually in question. That's fine. We do pay for things. It's just that we don't pay for things that we don't have to. Now, if people have to pay for open source, it breaks. That's our catch-22. Right? So charging for open source, I don't think that's the answer. I don't actually think that's going to work. What else have we got? What other options? Social responsibility is one that gets talked about a lot, and we've been thinking about, and every now and then someone will get up at the end of the conference, give a very inspiring talk about how we all need to be socially responsible. It doesn't work. Companies are not charities. Again, I say this without any bad things behind it. Like, this is good. I run a company. It's not a charity. It's not meant to be. The fact that it's not a charity is part of what makes it work. Social responsibility is actually not the answer. Let's have a look at what does. There are some things that do. What I've identified across all of them is the concept of a virtuous cycle, where one behavior leads to another behavior that leads back to the first behavior, and they enhance each other. Now, there's a really great GitHub repo that I want to shout out to called Lemonade Stand, which goes into great detail about all of the different models that have sort of emerged or been recognized about financially supporting open source. They're broad, and it covers the whole scale of open source, everything from React Select to Git. But I want to narrow in on a few projects that are going to be hopefully quite relevant to everyone in this room, starting with React. Now, React, from what I can tell, is sustainable. React, that model is corporate stewardship. So Facebook maintain React, sustain it, grow it. They get a lot of benefit out of this. I mean, I know they have their reasons. It's very good for them to do that, so they keep doing it. That's very good for React. That's very good for them. This is a virtuous cycle. This is one of the sustainable models for open source. Another project, which I'll say as many good things about this as Tejas just did, Apollo. They have a virtuous cycle with services and support. The company behind Apollo supports the open source tooling that we love, which means that this works. Next is one of my favorite ways to build a dynamic web app. And it's made by Zeit, who've developed a platform. Now, one of the best ways to build a server-side rendered dynamic app with React is in Next. One of the best ways to host that app is on Now. This works. This feels sustainable. There is a cycle here. And Gatsby, another great project. And it's awesome to have some of the Gatsby team here in the room today. Gatsby is driven by this amazing vision of the future of the internet. And that's actually managed to attract funding, so they can throw incredible resource at this project. These are all big projects that I'm talking about. They're projects where the open source and the business model have kind of been conceived in balance to create a virtuous cycle that sustains what's going on, and we're all benefiting from that. I am really happy that this is becoming almost a mainstream model. But another conversation that I had earlier in this week was with Eric and his form library, and he sort of mentioned to me that it's really awkward to build something that saves companies millions of dollars and get $300 a month for it. Now, in the talk, Eric actually launched FormNerd, which I love for a number of reasons. One, I think it's a really cool idea. Two, it's him finding a way to create an abstraction where there's a service that people will pay for, because we pay for things we have to, that is going to sustain what he's passionate about, which is forms and open source. And then that will, in turn, drive more attention to the service that he's offering, and like this is setting up a virtual cycle. Now, I feel like this was sort of very obvious to me because at ThinkMill we do a lot of open source, and we have our own virtual cycle. We build software, we open source a lot of that, or as much as possible. That helps like increase the value of what we're building because we get all the peer review and the feedback, and it also creates awareness about what we do. People think that's cool. That turns into opportunities, which helps us build more software. So we actually have our own virtual cycle running, and that helps keep us sustainable. But you know, all of these things that I'm talking about, they are abstractions. And what I want to challenge you with is, what would happen if we didn't need them? What if we could get rid of these abstractions? I'm going to show you one of my favorite Twitter bios, Alex's. Now, we heard an incredible talk from Alex yesterday about React Beautiful D&D, and I love the way he describes what he does. Trying to create software that makes other people feel like rock stars. What a cool thing to just want to do and spend your time doing and care about. What if that was enough? What if actually wanting to build things that helped people, made them more productive, made them feel like rock stars was enough without needing to kind of find a combination of luck and services and strategy to actually make it sustainable? Let's have a look at another project that we all get a huge amount of value from that tries to do that. Babel is supported by donations. Now, if you go to the website for Babel and you have a look at the top bar, there's a page, there's a nav link that says funding. If you click on it, at the very top of that page, you'll find this quote from Henry, which is that one of the greatest strengths of open source software is that it is open and free for everyone to contribute. This also leads to one of its greatest challenges, which is to support consistent, sustainable maintenance. And that's exactly, like, he has said it in 2 sentences, and I've taken, like, I don't know, at least 10 minutes to get here. Babel is critical infrastructure. That create React app command that I showed you, I mean, that's going to install Babel. We would probably not be able to function without Babel. And Babel is a great project. It's really well run. It's really well organized and set up. It has a clear roadmap. I mean, it doesn't even have to make up what it's going to do. Literally, that comes from the spec. A new feature comes into JavaScript, and Babel need to implement it early so that we can all get access to it. It's part of ensuring that the changes proposed to the spec are right and get early adoption. And there are volunteers who are ready to work on this. The problem is that it is seriously underfunded. And that's kind of weird because it is the best funded project on Open Collective. All of these great companies have donated money over time. Now, Henry set out, he actually quit his job to work on Babel full time, which is a little bit scary for him at the time, I think, but it's worked out well enough. But their goal is to have a couple of people working on it, in addition to him, a couple of people working part-time getting paid $4,000 per month. Who, in gross, in tax and super, gets paid more than $4,000 a month in this room? I don't want you to raise your hands, just think about it. They can't afford that. All they can afford is $2,000 per month. Who would do that? Who's going to take that job? They have $100,000 in the bank, and that is amazing. That is a lot of bank for an open source project. But would you take a job with a startup that you knew only had 100 grand in the bank? Like, startups raise millions of dollars just in a seed round these days. So I worry about this. I think we can do better. So to kind of summarize all of this up, without successful commercial abstraction, open source generally suffers from the tragedy of the commons. If you haven't heard of that, it's defined by Wikipedia as a situation in which, in a shared resource system, where individual users acting independently and according to their own self-interest behave contrary to the common good of all users by depleting or spoiling the shared resource through their collective action. Like, no individual is acting to spoil the resource, but by collective action, that is the outcome, and that's why it's a tragedy. Conveniently, on the Wikipedia page for the tragedy of commons, there are also some solutions that are sort of reasonably well acknowledged, and one of those is the midway solution. And this is to say that on one extreme you can have privatization, on the other extreme you can have government control, but in the middle you can have this system where everyone just does a little bit. And that actually makes it work. When you can get that to happen, it works. So, without successful commercial abstraction, open source leans too heavily on individual value, like what I was talking about at the start of this talk, to be sustainable at scale. What that means? We need our companies on board. We can't use social responsibility to do that, but I think we just need to frame the value of open source in terms that companies are already familiar with. And I think this is what we can do differently from here. Like, companies spend a lot of money, quite happily. That's not actually a problem because they also make money, and they spend money in ways that they understand helps them make more money. Whether it's investment, whether it's revenue, whatever the model is, like, there are things that companies have budgets for, like training. I'm sure that a fair few of you have come to the conference on a ticket that was paid for by your training budget. We have a training budget. It's great. Now, in open source, you're working with the largest team in the world. So if you want to train your employees to work in the largest team in the world, give them some time to contribute to open source meaningfully. And some of the most and least experienced people will comment on your code. There are great things to learn from both ends of that scale. You learn great API design because you need to. Otherwise, you get strangled. You learn good documentation skills. Again, back to Max's point right at the start. This is something that I think we can all get better at. Like, as in, it's impossible to be good enough at. You also have to constraints. You have to operate with seriously constrained resources. That drives innovation. A lot of the talk that Mitchell gave was talking about innovation established trying to maintain open source projects because we don't have enough time to do all that manual stuff. We build great automation and then, oh look, that's actually, we can totally use that over here on our commercial project. That's fantastic. There was no driver in the business maybe to improve that, but we learned it in open source and we bring it back again. It's really healthy. Also, this is an interesting one. There's no forced adoption. If I build something that isn't very good, but everyone else in my company is getting paid to use that, then they're going to use it anyway. In open source, it's not going to work like that. When you build something good, you have to learn how to build good things in order to be good at open source. And then I wanted to shout out to the comfort zone concept. Like, the best learning, or being out of your comfort zone can help with the best learning. And my final point on this is, like, where else can you get this sort of broad experience as a product owner and a designer and a marketer and an engineer and even a diplomat when those jerks show up? So training-wise, I think that's a way that we don't often frame open source, and maybe that can help justify why it's actually worth investing time in it. But that's not the biggest stick I've got today, because really what companies will spend money on almost more than anything else is risk. All sorts of different kinds of risk. There's legal risk. Lawyers are really expensive. We all have employment contracts, for those of you who aren't in school. Retention. We have vesting shares because it's expensive to lose staff and then have to train up their replacement. Insurance is one of my favorite ones because it's well understood that everyone just paying a little bit is worthwhile, because then if something big happens, it doesn't actually cost us that much. Now, I was talking to someone earlier today about this insurance thing, and they said, look, maybe what's going on is this risk hasn't manifested, and that's why it's not well recognized. I would argue that it has. For those of you who don't recognize this logo, this is Heartbleed. There was a bug in SSL that completely undermined the security of the internet and all of our banking and everything else because of underfunded open source. But that's probably too extreme, because that happened a couple of years ago and this hasn't really changed. So maybe we should, I'm going to get down off my soapbox. Sorry, I've been on a soapbox. let's put this in terms that our companies understand. What would be the cost if a company had to maintain one of its open source dependencies suddenly? Just in like, think about your own time. Think about what you spend your time doing when you're programming. Like, we know that that's going to cost us time. What is the cost of not having that package that saves you a few days in this last sprint? Like, that's an easy one, a few days in this last sprint. But time is, if you leave opportunity aside, like, we get paid salaries, therefore money, so, there is actually a cost. But all of these costs, you know what, they're kind of small. And that kind of brings us back to this idea that no one individual company can or even should actually be funding this. Like, this is no one's responsibility to solve. So let me pitch you a different idea. For any company that is employing an engineer, let's say they pay them $100,000 a year. We're paying our in-house team this member on our in-house team 100 grand. Let's match that with $100 to our open source team. Because we're very good at understanding that we have in-house developers that we have employment contracts with and we pay their salaries, and like that we can tell them what to do. But we also have open source developers. I feel like when I import Babel, everyone who contributes to Babel is like part of my team. They're actually one of my developers because they're building software that I'm using. And I think thinking about all of these people contributing to things that we're deriving value from as part of our team helps. So let's dream for a second. What could happen if we took the good intentions that are powering open source in those early stages and actually map that with incentives? When you can align intentions and incentives, good things happen. I think what we'd see is actually a huge growth in innovation. And the reason I'm talking to you all about this today is because I believe that we are the ones who have to make this happen. And that's because we are the ones who have the power to make this happen. Let's talk about being a developer. We influence budget decisions. We make decisions about infrastructure. If I want to host a site on Netlify, my company is going to pay for Netlify. We make decisions about licensing software. If I want to talk to my teammates using Slack, my company is going to be paying for Slack licenses. We should actually be making decisions about funding open source. Also, do you think investors wanted to start spending money on free lunches? Because we're pretty good at getting them, and beer fridges, and ping pong tables, and a whole lot of other things. Like, actually, yes, they have good ROI. That's actually well known now, and so does open source. This is the gap we need to fill. So let's try and fill that gap by talking to companies in terms they understand and get them to add a line item to their budget. Because this is how change happens. All you need to do is get that line item to start appearing. It doesn't have to be big, but that was my big point. No one applauded. I knew no one was going to applaud. My whole takeaway point, my big line here is, let's add a line item to our budget. Yes, thank you. It's not a big one. $100 per developer. I'm going to start. This is the fun part. Look under your seats. I'm serious. If you're watching from the loft, there will be people, because you don't have seats, but there is one of these. This is a gift voucher. So I assigned everyone at ThinkMill $100 and then put that in open collective gift vouchers, which after exchange rates and a whole lot of people at a conference, that works out to $5 each. And I'm giving them to all of you to invest in an open source project. So take that, take it home, sign up for an open collective account, and invest that money in an open source project that has improved your quality of life, or that has helped you in the last week or month, or that you would be really sad if it disappeared or stopped being maintained. Help me start this conversation. This is not something one person can do. Let's get this conversation going in terms that work for the companies we work in. Let's talk about risks. Let's talk about investment. Let's talk about learning. And let's start recognizing the value of open source. How do you think we got the ping pong tables and the free lunches? We just went and said, this is important to us. And it ended up in budgets. So if you can go, and if there's any favor you can do me, after you've invested that money in an open source project that you love, go and ask your company to match it. ask them to give you $100 to invest to their developers. If we just had the people at this conference go and have that successful conversation, we'd have just created $50,000 in open source funding, which is half the current budget of Babel. I don't actually believe that there are any companies in Australia who could not afford $100 this year per developer for the value we get from open source. It's so easy to spend money. We sign up, someone joins and it's like another $50,000 a month for their Slack account, like $100 in a whole year. Let's do it, because this is going to be a huge thing for open source. And just by the way, I've been speaking with different companies, and there are companies that are doing this today, and their feedback is that it works. Airbnb, TripleByte, DigitalOcean are all featured on the gift cards page of Open Collective. The company has a budget, a line item for open source that gets turned into gift cards, that gets given to developers, and then developers distribute that. And there are lots of interesting ways to use it, and I think this is another area that we can all actually get excited about innovating in, because we kind of care a lot about it, right? To go along with that, we actually just launched a website called budgetforopensource.org, and what I would really love to be able to do is get more than ThinkMill on that list of companies that have committed to just having $100 per developer per annum in their budget. Wouldn't that be cool? We did some maths earlier. If you could get like 1% of the developers in the world to do $100 per annum, we would have just tripled the amount of funding that went into all of open source via Open Collective last year. Anyway, thank you for letting me tell you about that, and I hope you spend your open source dollars wisely. And I hope this actually starts a conversation about how to engage with our businesses and our open source in terms that are meaningful. I think this has been an incredible conference, but we're all here because of open source. I mean, React is open source. Funding it actually does fit the models that our companies are used to investing in. We don't have to be reliant on the virtuous cycles that exist. We just need to frame it in those terms. So yeah, let's add a line item for open source. Thank you.